A single plant capable of producing 15 tons of food per acre was deliberately erased from agricultural memory. This is not a story about crop failure or disease. This is a story about a vegetable that worked too well for a system that demanded dependence. The Jerusalem artichoke once fed millions across Europe and North America, thriving in conditions where potatoes rotted and wheat failed. Then, after 1945, it vanished from fields, markets, and collective consciousness. The industrial food system had found its enemy. Not a pest or a blight, but a crop that refused to need anything. No pesticides, no irrigation, no replanting every spring. Just perennial roots that returned every year, multiplying underground, offering food without permission. The tuber was knobby, irregular, impossible to mechanize. It spoiled within weeks, resisting the cold storage empire. But before the supermarket killed it, this plant represented something dangerous: complete food sovereignty. The system could not profit from a crop that planted itself. Helianthus tuberosus is not an artichoke and has nothing to do with Jerusalem. The name itself is a corruption, a mistranslation, a linguistic accident that buried its true identity. This is a North American sunflower that produces edible tubers instead of seeds. Indigenous peoples cultivated it for over 3,000 years, long before Europeans arrived with their grain obsessions. The plant reaches 10 feet tall, crowned with yellow flowers, while underground its roots expand into sweet, crisp tubers. Unlike potatoes, which die back completely, Jerusalem artichoke roots survive temperatures of -40 degrees. The tubers sit frozen in the ground all winter, converting starches to sugars, becoming sweeter with every frost. Spring arrives and the plant explodes back to life without a single seed planted. One tuber left in the soil produces 20 the following year. 20 becomes 400. 400 becomes 8,000. This is not farming. This is managed wildness. The plant spreads aggressively, tolerates poor soil, laughs at drought. Nature designed the perfect survival food, and we chose the potato instead. By the 17th century, Jerusalem artichokes had conquered Europe. French farmers grew them as pig feed and peasant staples, recognizing their reliability when grain harvests failed. German settlers brought them to Russia, where they thrived in the harsh continental climate. During the Napoleonic Wars, when blockades starved cities, the tubers kept populations alive. World War I saw them cultivated across trench systems, providing food when supply lines collapsed. Even through the Great Depression, when industrial agriculture faltered, these roots sustained rural communities. The tubers were roasted, boiled, pickled, fermented, and eaten raw. They tasted like a hybrid between water chestnuts and sweet potatoes, with a subtle artichoke finish. But the real value was not taste. The real value was relentless, unstoppable productivity. A family could plant a small patch and harvest enough calories to survive winter. The only labor required was digging. Then came the Industrial Revolution in agriculture. Suddenly, survival was no longer the goal. Standardization was. After World War II, agricultural policy shifted toward monoculture and mechanization. Governments subsidized crops that could be harvested by machine, stored for months, and shipped across continents. Potatoes fit the model perfectly. Jerusalem artichokes did not. The tubers were knobby and irregular, jamming mechanical harvesters designed for uniform shapes. They could not be washed and packed on assembly lines without bruising. They spoiled within 2 weeks, even in refrigeration, making long-distance shipping impossible. Supermarkets demanded produce with 6-month shelf lives. This crop offered 6 weeks at best. The food industry had no use for a plant that expired before reaching shelves. Chemical agriculture had no use for a perennial that required no fertilizer. Seed companies had no use for a crop that replanted itself. So the crop was systematically removed from agricultural recommendations, seed catalogs, and government farming guides. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded without creating profit. The Jerusalem artichoke contains a carbohydrate that the human body cannot fully digest: inulin. This is not a deficiency, this is a feature. Inulin passes through the stomach and small intestine intact, feeding beneficial bacteria in the colon. The result is a prebiotic effect, supporting gut health in ways that modern processed foods actively destroy. A single 100-gram serving provides 3 grams of fiber, more than most commercial vegetables. The tubers contain 17% dry matter compared to 20% in potatoes, but with far superior mineral density. They deliver potassium, iron, and thiamine at levels that outperform standard root vegetables. The glycemic index sits at 50, lower than white potatoes, making them suitable for blood sugar management. When raw, the tubers are crisp and slightly sweet. When roasted, they caramelize into a nutty, complex flavor. But here's the catch. Inulin ferments in the digestive system, producing gas in those unaccustomed to high-fiber diets. The industrial system labeled this as a flaw. The real flaw was a population raised on white bread and stripped grains, unable to tolerate real fiber. Comparative yield studies consistently show Jerusalem artichokes producing 12 to 15 tons per acre. Potatoes, under optimal conditions, yield 4 to 5 tons per acre. This is not a marginal difference. This is a complete recalculation of land use efficiency. 1 acre of sunchokes can feed 3 times as many people as 1 acre of potatoes. The plant requires zero irrigation in temperate climates, pulling moisture from deep taproots. It tolerates acidic soils, alkaline soils, clay, sand, and nutrient-poor ground. No crop rotation is necessary because the plant does not deplete soil nutrients. Pests largely ignore it. Diseases rarely affect it. The only input required is sunlight and time. Compare this to modern potato cultivation, which demands synthetic fertilizers, fungicides, and pest control. Potatoes require replanting every single year with certified disease-free seed stock. Jerusalem artichokes laugh at this entire system. They simply grow year after year, regardless of human intervention. This made them worthless to an economy built on selling solutions to fabricated problems. Imagine biting into a fresh tuber pulled from frozen ground in February. The texture is crisp, almost crunchy, like a raw water chestnut. The flavor is subtly sweet with earthy undertones and a faint nuttiness. Roasted at high heat, the sugars caramelize, producing a golden crust that rivals any gourmet root vegetable. Sliced thin and fried, they become chips with more complexity than anything found in a bag. Pureed into soup, they create a creamy, velvety base without dairy. Pickled, they retain crunch while absorbing vinegar and spice. Yet grocery stores offer none of this. Instead, shelves overflow with potatoes bred for storage, not taste. These industrial tubers are watery, bland, designed to survive shipping, not to nourish. The modern food system has convinced populations that convenience equals quality. In reality, convenience equals compromise. The Jerusalem artichoke was eliminated not because it tasted worse, but because it tasted too good to be profitable. Cultivating Jerusalem artichokes requires almost nothing. Plant tubers 4 inches deep in early spring. Water once, walk away. By summer, towering stalks dominate the garden, shading out weeds, requiring no maintenance. Yellow flowers bloom in late summer, attracting pollinators while the roots swell underground. Harvest begins after the first frost when starches have converted to sugars. Dig only what is needed, the rest overwinters in the soil, ready for spring. Any tuber left behind becomes next year's crop, multiplying exponentially. This is food production without inputs, without costs, without corporate dependence. The plant spreads aggressively, so containment may be necessary. Raised beds, root barriers, or dedicated garden zones keep growth manageable. But the aggressive nature is precisely the point. This plant wants to feed people. It requires no permission, no certification, no patent. Growing it is an act of defiance against the controlled scarcity model. Small-scale farmers and permaculture advocates have begun reintroducing Jerusalem artichokes to food systems. Farmers' markets occasionally feature them, labeled as Sunchokes, to avoid the confusing historical name. Restaurants experiment with them, roasting, frying, and pureeing the tubers into high-end dishes. But mainstream agriculture remains uninterested. The crop offers no profit margins for seed companies, no chemical dependencies for agribusiness. It represents a threat to the system that demands annual purchases and perpetual inputs. Yet for backyard gardeners and homesteaders, it represents liberation. A single planting can provide food for decades. The plant requires no special knowledge, no advanced techniques. Children can harvest tubers by hand, learning food production through direct engagement. This is the crop that industrial agriculture tried to erase, and it is quietly returning. Not through policy or subsidy, but through individuals reclaiming food sovereignty one tuber at a time. The Jerusalem artichoke forces a fundamental question. Why do we replant food every year? Annual agriculture is a construct of control, not necessity. Nature operates on perennial cycles where plants return without human intervention. The shift to annual crops was not about feeding populations, it was about controlling populations. A society dependent on replanting every spring is a society dependent on seed suppliers, fertilizer manufacturers, and distribution networks. Perennial crops break this dependency. They establish food systems that function independently of markets and governments. This is why perennials were systematically discouraged in modern agriculture. Not because they produce less, but because they produce without requiring continuous purchases. The Jerusalem artichoke embodies this resistance. It grows without asking permission, produces without demanding inputs, and feeds without creating debt. Planting it is not just gardening, it is a rejection of enforced scarcity. Every tuber in the ground is a vote against the system that convinced us food must be bought, not grown. Imagine neighborhoods where every yard contains a patch of Jerusalem artichokes, not as ornamental plants but as functional food sources. Imagine cities where vacant lots transform into perennial food forests, with tubers providing reliable calories for local communities. This is not fantasy, this is historical precedent. Before industrial agriculture centralized food production, communities fed themselves through diverse, localized systems. The Jerusalem artichoke was one piece of that system, providing abundant yields without agricultural infrastructure. It can be that again. The plant is still here, waiting in the soil of a few dedicated gardens. It has not been improved by selective breeding, not patented by corporations, not genetically modified for profit. It remains exactly as it was when indigenous peoples first cultivated it thousands of years ago. A living link to a food system that prioritized resilience over revenue. The choice is simple: continue depending on supply chains and supermarkets, or reclaim the plants that sustained humanity before industrialization. The tubers are still growing, still multiplying, still offering themselves freely. The only question is whether we remember how to dig. The elimination of Jerusalem artichokes from agriculture was not an accident. It was a calculated decision to centralize food production and eliminate self-sufficiency. The system cannot profit from plants that replant themselves and require no inputs. So those plants were quietly removed from seed catalogs, farming guides, and public consciousness. But the plants did not disappear, they simply waited. Every abandoned farm, every overgrown garden, every forgotten patch of earth holds the potential for their return. Growing them now is an act of remembrance. It is reclaiming what was deliberately stolen, the knowledge that food can be free, abundant, and independent of markets. The revolution does not require protest or policy. It requires seeds, or in this case, tubers. It requires dirt, time, and the willingness to let plants grow wild. The Jerusalem artichoke offers a simple truth. Food systems built on control will always fear crops built on freedom. Every perennial crop planted today becomes a legacy for future generations. The children who harvest tubers from ground their grandparents planted learn a lesson no classroom can teach. They learn that food does not originate in stores. They learn that abundance does not require permission. They learn that the earth provides without demanding payment. This knowledge is more valuable than any industrial crop yield. The Jerusalem artichoke is not just a plant, it is a living archive of food independence. Growing it preserves the memory of a time when communities fed themselves without corporate intermediaries. It teaches resilience, self-reliance, and the quiet power of perennial systems. The modern world will not voluntarily return to these principles. But individuals can, one garden at a time. Plant the tubers, watch them spread, harvest the yields. This is how lost knowledge returns. The Jerusalem artichoke has been waiting for nearly 80 years. It is time to bring it back, not through agricultural policy or corporate adoption, but through backyard gardens and community plots. Source tubers from specialty nurseries, farmers markets, or gardening exchanges. Plant them in spring, let them grow wild, harvest after frost. Share the yields, share the knowledge, share the tubers. This is food sovereignty in its purest form. Every person who plants them weakens the grip of industrial agriculture. Every harvest proves that abundance does not require dependence. The revolution grows underground, multiplying quietly, waiting to be dug.